Welcome. This is Spill the Tea with La Libre. And today we are talking about parte dos. We're talking about part two of our very quick parts 1 and 2 series on what's the deal with speaking quizzes, how to incorporate more speaking quizzes into your world language classroom routine. All of these quizzes that we're going to be talking about are proficiency oriented at their core. And we talked previously in part 1, I will put the link below if you haven't seen this one yet, the replay is on YouTube, that talked about what is the purpose of doing a speaking quiz, especially in level 1. So if you're interested, check that on out and get up to speed on where we're at. But we're going to fast forward to part 2, which is all about, well, if you're interested in incorporating speaking activities and assessments as an integral part of your world language practice on a fairly regular basis, weekly, I would say, or bi-weekly for the assessment part of it, then today's class is going to be about the logistical piece of that. How do you actually make these bad boys happen? So for speaking quizzes, we have a few unique challenges that we need to address. And that's what we're going to do in the 10 minutes that we have together. Number 1 being, how do you make this go smoothly in a classroom environment? Because you and I both know that that's a huge challenge. I mean, if I just said to you right now, you're going to administer a speaking quiz where every student is going to come to your desk and speak in French for 30 seconds. I can already tell that your hair's on fire. So we're going to address that first concern. The second thing we're going to talk about is, how do you practice for these? And third thing that we're going to talk about is, how do you make sure that students feel very prepared for it? And how do you manage the environment so that it's very conducive to both an assessment atmosphere as well as a review atmosphere for when it's time to actually administer the dang thing? And the fourth thing that we're going to talk about is, what do you do with reluctant speakers? And this could be for a number of reasons, and we're going to get there with number 4. So let's jump right in. The first thing that we're going to talk about is the logistics piece of this. So what does a speaking quiz look like? For me, I will give you my previous context so it makes sense, some of the suggestions I'm going to give to you. My background was in high school, French and Spanish, 1 and 2. And for those classes, speaking quizzes were literally my bread and butter. I used to do them all the time, bi-weekly, usually every 2 to 3 weeks, probably. And the way that I would make this work is, the questions would be the focus of the unit or the lesson that we were working on at that time. So for example, if they were learning how to say their names and how to greet people, like greetings and leave takings, guess what? That's a speaking quiz. And you can go back to part 1 to learn about like why I used to do this. So if that's the speaking quiz, then what I would do is, immediately after we had started practicing the material, playing games with it, all of that stuff, I would make it very, very clear from the beginning that I am not expecting perfection in these speaking assessments, but these are to make sure that the vocabulary solidifies in your brain. Refer back to part 1 as to why short, quick assessments like this with only 2 to 3 questions are really good for this. And at this point in time, of course, again, for levels 1 and 2, this is mostly rehearsed language, and that's okay. That's what level they're at. You can advance this to be more interactive, more original language in levels 3 and 5. But for something simple like, what's your name, where are you from, and how are you today, what I'm looking for is, can the student understand the question? That's really all I'm looking for, because that's the novice low and novice mid skill. So how do I do that? Well, I give all the students the questions far in advance, and the students then would write down the questions a couple times in various activities. You know, we use them in warm-ups. We would do speaking activities throughout the day with them. They would practice with me, with a whole class with choral response. Then I would break them into groups and they would do that. Those types of speaking activities. Then when it was time for the quiz, we would do speed dating, where they would get in or I would even call it like the soul train, where they would get in a row and they would be one-on-one across from each other. One student would be here and another student would be here. And I would have one student ask the question or really just respond to it. And then the other student would respond to it as well. And they would get each other's answers. And then they'd have to repeat back in English what their partner said so that they knew that they could understand them. or their L1. Oh, we're actually sneaking around, aren't we? I'm telling you about how I used to review for these activities. So sneakily, we're doing part 2 first. But those are the different ways that we used to review before it was time for the exam. Now let's get into the logistics. I'm jumping around. So for the logistics piece of this, students would know well in advance that there was a quiz coming that day, and we would practice for it. If you have a longer class period, I used to have block classes, so this would work well, make it work for you. But we would not do the assessment until the end of class so that we could spend all class reviewing for it, doing those various activities. The questions would be on the board, highly visible for all students to see, with a little description of maybe how to pronounce it or how to listen for it phonetically, or maybe even at the very, very early stages of the game, what the questions actually mean in English. But the questions are there for the students at all times so that you don't get a lot of questions during the assessment. What are the questions again? What do they mean? How do I do this? How do I say this? It really tightens it up. The next thing I highly suggest that you do is ask for volunteers first. Not only does this create a lot of trust, but there are different types of assessors in your classroom, test takers, really. There are people who are like me and are going to want to get it out of the way, but not first. Like they're going to want to go second or third. And then there are people who are clamoring to go first so that they can just read their book the rest of the class while everybody else is reviewing. You know who I'm talking about. And then there are those who are feeling semi-confident, but they feel like they need like 10 practices before they're ready to go. They want to go somewhere in the middle. And then there are those who are just hoping every day that you don't even know that they're there in the classroom, and they're going to wait until you call on them to actually go up, and they probably won't even review. So we got to work with all of the wonderful students that we have, right? When you ask for volunteers, it allows everybody to self-select. And then those who cannot self-select, you will select for them. Do that in some sort of random selection method that you already use in your classroom, whether it be equity sticks or spinner on the board. You know what I'm talking about. Do something that's really fair for everyone, that allows for everybody to have a chance to either volunteer or be voluntold. And the last thing that I highly recommend that you do for the logistics piece of this is do not allow students to sit for more than a minute on an answer. It's only 2 or 3 questions. And that is an important piece of the logistics of this too, is with these, if you have more than 3 questions, you're really going to get into the woods on this. It's going to take a lot longer, twice as long, really. You're going to have a lot more room for errors, and the test also loses its purpose the more questions that you ask, because the whole purpose of doing something like this is to solidify small, bite-sized, crucial pieces of information that you want your students to know. Think about the questions that they will get asked all of the time in interpersonal circumstances with a target language native speaker. Those are the things that you should put in speaking quizzes, like, hey, where are you from? Or how can I help you if you're, learning about some sort of travel situation, airport, whatever it might be. Or, what do you like to do? Or what are your plans this weekend? Those are the things that occur in conversation naturally all of the time. You also want to make sure that with your questions, you have a time limit on how long they can answer. Don't do this the first or second time that you do this, though. Allow them to be lengthy and take as much time as they want to get used to it. And then the second time, you can up the difficulty by telling them that they have 1 minute to answer each question. And if they have difficulty with that, then it's because they don't understand what is being said to them. Because in a conversation, honestly, like a 1 minute pause is deeply unnatural. So that's what we're looking for here, is to try and recreate as much as possible in a pretty unnatural environment, a classroom, what it would be like to interact with a native speaker. So that's my recommendation to you, to keep this short and sweet. If you have a list of volunteers as well, it keeps people coming up to you so that this goes very smoothly. My last recommendation to you for the logistics piece of this, number 1 is, oh my gosh, for the love of all that is sacred in a classroom, please make sure that you are the one administering the questions. When you get into a world language classroom, you'll see many scenarios where students are asking each other questions. And I would encourage you to check the proficiency guidelines if you're doing this in your classroom, because it's not until novice high that students are able to confidently ask simple, everyday questions with confidence, okay? And those questions are things like, ¿Y tú qué quieres comer? Not things like, name all of the rooms in your house in a complete sentence. Please don't ask students to ask very complicated questions to each other for the purpose of a speaking quiz. It creates a lot of problems. Just trust me on that one. Some people will do it for the sake of time, but it's really not worth it, because what's going to happen is you're going to have suffering grades, and nothing's worth that. Frankly, nothing's worth that. So in my humble opinion, it's much better if you get to be the language parent for those students, ask the questions in the proper intonation, speech, and all that good stuff, so that they know exactly what the questions are every time. There's no question, there's no doubt. And that you're only testing them on what's appropriate for their proficiency level. That's the whole point of the game, right? Okay, so we went into a little bit of review because I accidentally switched those around 1 and 2, but those are some of the review activities that I like to do for this. And as well as that is that for review activities and ways that you make sure that students are prepared for this is be sure to select questions that actually make sense and are very real world oriented. That way it's much more natural to design activities that work for this, because then you're testing them on their ability to communicate and continue the conversation. If you're asking students to do things like, hey, describe your house, tell me the rooms in it and who lives there, what family members do you have? That's very conversational, like who's in your family? If you are asking questions that don't really make sense for a conversation, it's going to be really hard to generate activities. So check the nature of your questions. Shannon, I'm so glad that you asked this question. What is the rest of the class doing while you're quizzing and testing the individual students? So Shannon, you got me to point number 3, which is, what is your environment going to look like while the other students are taking this speaking assessment or quiz or whatever you're doing? And I would honestly recommend that you do this for all speaking activities, really. Make sure that you have a I was about to use my favorite sailor phrase, but we won't here. I make sure that you're using a butt ton of background noise, like a crazy amount of background noise. It should sound like utter chaos in your classroom. That's a good thing. That's the sound of vibrant learning, if you ask me. But I'm talking really loud reggaeton in the background, like the craziest, most hypnotic Martinique beats that you can think of, like really loud music playing in your classroom, as well as a somewhat noisy review activity that other students are working on with each other. It can be just as simple as, hey, here are the questions, they're on the board or on this little review sheet. You need to review with at least 10 people before you can work on something else. And then after you're working on that, I have a very in-depth web quest for you to do. Students are working the whole time that other students are taking this assessment. Why? Because you don't want to be messing around with other students' behaviors and redirects while you have a student in front of you who needs 85% of your attention. 85% of your attention is going to be on that student. And then you're going to go and make sure that your eyes are moving around the room to check on the environment and that students are working towards what they need to be working on and that they are focused on the task at hand. Or if they feel like they've completed the assessment to the best of their ability, they're one of your volunteers that have already gone, let them work on their science homework. Sure, they did a great job. Good for them. So students are always working on something and it's always fairly loud. Why should it be fairly loud? Because students do not want to be heard during this assessment. They do not want to be heard. So make sure that they don't feel like everybody's listening in on your conversation. And when you play a lot of loud music or there's a lot of other people doing and bustling around doing activities, they won't be heard. So this brings me into then the next thing that we need to talk about, which is part 4, which is you will always run into this, and that's students who are going to be very reluctant to take this type of assessment. Of course they are. Number one way that I would say that you can prevent this problem is make sure they do it a lot. Make sure they do it a lot. Raise your hand if you have ever taught almost a full year or a full semester of a world language class, and you realize by the end of it that you've never asked them to speak in front of you, even poorly. Like you've never done it and you've never assessed it. So of course they're going to be deeply uncomfortable with it. Give them the chance to do a few low stakes versions of this in activities, in a couple low point quizzes, things like that, to get them comfortable with the idea that this is a speaking environment and we're going to do this a lot. Now, then I would get to the option of, if students are really, really uncomfortable with it, if you'll always have a few, like 5 or 6, that's completely normal and natural, then I would definitely give anybody who asks for it the option to do these 2 things. 1, take it at a different time when nobody else is there, because you could make the environment as comfortable as you want. Some students are just going to feel better that way. That's okay, but make sure that they have skin in the game for it. They have to come during their lunchtime. They have to come in between class time, which makes them rush to their next one really fast, or they have to, take out some of their independent study time to come see you. Do not rearrange your schedule for this. Make sure that only the students who truly need this are asking for it and utilizing it. And the other thing that you can do, which is really, really simple, and a lot of students used to prefer from me, is instead of having the assessment happen at your desk, and the classroom has to be in well-maintained order for this to work, but any teacher can do that. That sounded really flippant. What I meant by is that this is possible for any classroom. It's possible for any classroom. So even if you have little management things, that's what I meant by that. That even if you have little management things popping up here and there, you can still do this. With a lot of people like to shy away from this because it sounds like you're relinquishing a lot of control of the classroom. But it's this simple option here, and that is allow them to be outside of the classroom with you, and you just crack the door open. You don't ever close the door. You leave a foot in the door so that you can still see the entire classroom. And I would occasionally, even if you don't need to, just stick your head in and peek around and just make sure that students know that you are still keeping a good eye on everything that's going on in class. And redirect a few students that you see immediately, like the first 2 times that you do this. Be extra, extra, extra on it for anyone who might take advantage of you being outside of the classroom to, pull out their phone, do something like that, walk around the room and poke people, that kind of thing. Take the students who would like a little more privacy, just ask them to walk outside the classroom with you, be right by the door, stick your foot in the crack so that you have a huge amount of view still, and let the students take their exam in private. Works really well, works really, really well. It gives a much more of an illusion of privacy because there's not everybody else around you, but you can still see, if you stand in the right place, you can still see everything that's going on in your classroom. You can do it. Okay. Oh, I see another question here. Let me take a look at this before we sign this off. You said that it's novice high for students to ask simple questions confidently. Is there a resource available that outlines which skills pertain to which level? There is, Maddox. Okay, so I'm going to recommend a document to you. And for anybody else out there who's also wondering this, I'm glad you asked this because I'm sure people are asking. This is based off of the performance indicators from ACTFL. So if you want to do this right now, I put it in the comments for you to Google, but I'll find the link for you later. They're also known as the can-do statements. Look for the interpersonal section. Look for the interpersonal section, and you will see on there that when it comes to asking and answering questions, in novice, there's a section that talks about interpersonal abilities in novice mid. Novice mid is mostly answering and responding to questions. Novice high talks about asking, understanding, and responding to questions. So that's where the difference really is. Yeah, of course. I'm so glad you asked that. But if you look on the ACTFL website, you will find it, but it's a little harder to find inside the menu because their menu is a little weird. But if you just Google ACTFL performance indicators, it'll come right up for you. And it's a really easy document to just download and print off. I used to have them on my classroom wall. And those bad boys are really good to have on hand, because when you're in doubt of what's actually a good way to assess where my students are at in their current proficiency level, ACTFL's already done the work for you, or CEFR if you're watching from a place that doesn't use ACTFL, because not all countries do, obviously, because ACTFL is American. But CEFR is the same. They have the same types of documents to help you out. And this is a tangent, but really quickly, I have a class on this for you. If you go to my YouTube channel and search ACTFL can-do statements or performance indicators, I have a full class for you, Maddox, that talks about how this works. It's pretty in-depth, so like get your notebook. It's going to be intense. All right, so I'm so glad that y'all were able to join me for this class today on how to run speaking quizzes in your classroom. We did go a little bit longer today, but that's because we have really good questions. But let's give a quick rundown of what we talked about so that you can, if you need to, go back through and look at what we talked about. Remember that I accidentally flipped 1 and 2. But the first thing that we talked about, which should have been number 2, was ways to review for speaking quizzes. I gave you like 3 quick activities that you could do. The first thing is the logistics, like boom, 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 1, 2, 3. What do you need to do to set up your environment? The third thing that we talked about is how do you manage the actual environment and maintain a good assessment environment while students are taking the speaking quiz. And the last part that we talked about, number 4, is there are going to be students that are nervous about this type of activity. It's really new for them. So allow for any type of accommodations that need to happen. And it doesn't have to be formal. It can just be personality wise. I mean, I would appreciate any teacher that did that for me. And it doesn't require any more work on your part. Get you a lot of respect points. And to recap too, there is another class on this, part 1, that talks about why even do speaking quizzes in the first place. So if you're wondering, if you're intrigued on like, why did I used to do this crazy thing all the time? You'll see why in part 1. Go check it out. If you're in the group here, you can scroll to the videos and see it. And if you're on my YouTube channel, then you will see it linked below. But thank you so much for being here. This was so much fun. And I will see you next Wednesday at 4 for our next edition. Bye for now. I hope y'all have a great week.